Example number 2, little a is equal to 80 miles, little b is equal to 60 miles, and little c is equal to 35 miles. So it doesn't matter who we call A, B, or C. A is supposed to be the longest side, which is either this one or the other one down below. I guess it doesn't really matter. Let me just label big A, big B, big C. Then I've labeled little a, little b, little c. I know all of my sides, 80 miles. Little b is 60 miles, and little c is 35 miles. Not drawn to scale, but that's okay. So the second situation that you will be using the law of cosines in, again, in our first example, we were given side angle side, and we use the law of cosines when given that. We also use the law of cosines when we're given side, side, side. Okay, so, and next, we have 3 angles to find here. We have big A, big B, big C. If you don't go in, if I find angle A first and then angle B second, I will get a slightly different answer than somebody that finds angle B first, angle C second, a different answer than somebody that finds angle C and angle A first, or angle C then angle A. And so to avoid all these many different answers, which makes my grading life horrific, we're going to go in alphabetical order. Why? Because I said so. So I am telling you that you need to find cosine of big A first. He is equal to little b squared plus little c squared minus little a squared all over 2bc. And plugging in what we know so far, cosine of big A is equal to 60 squared plus our 35 squared minus the 80 squared all over 2 times 60 times 35. So our cosine of big A is equal to, just type it all in your calculator, 60 squared plus 35 squared minus 80 squared is negative 1575 divided by 2 times 60 times 35 is 4,200. And sometimes people get a little weirded out because our cosine is equal to a negative. That's perfectly fine. This is true if and only if our big A is equal to cosine inverse of our negative 1575 divided by 4,200. And cosine inverse, we do know a little something about him. This is kind of a side note, spits us back to an angle between 0 and pi. And which quadrant is cosine negative in? He's negative in Q2. Can a Q2 angle be an angle in a triangle? Absolutely. And so cosine inverse of a negative is, again, perfectly fine. So our A is approximately, because I gave you the sides to the nearest whole number, I'll ask you to round the angles to the nearest whole number. Cosine inverse of negative 1575 divided by 4,200. A is approximately 112 degrees. Next, we're going to find big B. Again, why? Because I said so. You need to go in alphabetical order, please. Then it doesn't make 20,000 different answers. So cosine of big B is equal to little a squared plus little c squared minus little b squared all over 2ac. And cosine of big B is equal to our 80 squared plus our 35 squared minus the 60 squared, all divided by 2 times 80 times 35. And so cosine of big B is equal to 80 squared plus 35 squared minus 60 squared, according to your calculator, should be 4,025 or 4025. And that is going to divide by 2 times 80 times 35, also according to your calculator, should be 5,600. Side note, I do know that these fractions reduce. I don't need you to reduce them before you cosine inverse them. And so this is true if and only if our B, wow, my arrows are terrible today. If and only if B is equal to cosine inverse of 4025 divided by 5,600. And then we put that in our calculator. Again, we're going to round to the nearest whole number. And this guy is approximately cosine inverse of 4,025 divided by 5,600 to the nearest whole number. Big B is approximately 44 degrees. And once we found big A and big B exactly, then you can just do big C by doing 180 minus the 112 minus the 44. And that gives us a big C of approximately 24 degrees. Okay, so last thing just to summarize. You use the law of cosines. When given. So law of cosines when given. Side angle side. So two sides and the angle in between those two sides. Or side, side, side. The other thing that I cannot stress to you enough, when you start with the law of cosines, end with the law of cosines. When you start with the law of cosines, end with the law of cosines, because there's no funny business, only one correct triangle. If you switch between, then funny things can happen. Why do that to yourself? When you start with the law of cosines, end with the law of cosines. And that wraps up the law of cosines.